Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is the seventh Mission Impossible film in the franchise, the third directed by Christopher McQuarrie, with another one on the way with Dead Reckoning Part 2. It stars Tom Cruise, Haley Atwell, Vang Rhames, Simon Pegg, Henry Czerny, and Rebecca Ferguson in a chaotic blend of action and comedy. Ethan Hunt and his Impossible Mission Force team must track down a dangerous weapon before it falls into the wrong hands. And this time around, the MacGuffin is a key, or rather, two parts to a key, that you need in order to basically shut down an existential threat to humanity. It's a very timely MacGuffin. The villain this time around isn't any one person, but instead like an existential threat of sorts, although you do have your main villain in the form of Esai Morales, who does a incredible job here at being cold, calm, and calculated, but also letting the audience understand that he is just a vessel for the true villain. And I think that that was one of the more interesting takes. A lot of people have said that it didn't work quite as well as we've gotten in the past Mission Impossible movies. However, I feel like depending on what we get from Dead Reckoning Part 2, it was justified and it was perfect for this film. Now let's talk a little bit about the action, because the action is the focal point of any Tom Cruise-led project, it seems. There were a ton of sequences. The car chases in the streets, the cobblestone streets of Rome, worked really, really well. The whole gag of Ethan Hunt and also of Haley Atwell's character being handcuffed together during that chase, made it all the more fun. People were doing their own stunts, both Tom Cruise and Haley Atwell. Of course, they probably weren't doing them the whole time, but seeing them, with a camera mounted on the hood of the car, actually drift through the streets of Rome is exhilarating. And I love the fact that these movies take such an initiative to show the audience that what they are doing is real. Not only does it add stakes to the actual plot of the film, but it also keys the audience and the viewer into realizing and recognizing just how detrimental if something were to go wrong, an accident would be. You had a bunch of fist fights and hand-to-hand combat throughout the movie as well, and I think a lot of that worked really well. There's a particular sequence with Ethan Hunt in this tight alleyway, and the Dutch angles and the way that they were able to capture that action on screen, those sequences had a huge nail-biting effect for the viewer, even for me. And I think a lot of it comes down to the placement of the action sequence within the constricted alleyway, but also the angles that they were choosing to capture things on. And then, of course, you have the pinnacle dirt bike base jump that Tom Cruise has been featured doing for the better part of 6 months. So we've seen a lot from this, but even then, there was a moment in the theater where the whole audience, you could feel the air being sucked out of the room when he makes that base jump off that cliff. And that's after we've seen so many featurettes and so many insights into how they made that stunt practical. I think in terms of performances here, Haley Atwell steals the entire show. She is able to emote in a way where her eyes are doing a lot of the acting for her. And her character, Grace, is a welcome addition to the Mission Impossible task force. When they announced that this movie was part 1 of 2, one of the things that went through my mind were stakes. There have been a lot of characters in the Mission Impossible franchise that have been killed off on screen, namely the villains, but also some of Ethan Hunt's own team members. And I sat there and was conceptualizing ways in which to bring the stakes forward in this film and to really give the audience a sense of dread for the characters. And they successfully were able to do that in this movie. I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but it does have stakes. And that's something I did appreciate about this particular Mission Impossible movie. And I'm also excited to see how it all rounds out the next go-around. If there is one department in particular where I felt the movie to be a little bit lackluster. It was the editing, the intercuts specifically between the gargantuan action sequences and some of the other plot points that are going on simultaneously. And I can think of two instances where the intercutting between two different scenes didn't work as well as it probably should have or could have had they just done it a little bit more effectively, maybe even to the point where we are not intercutting in those sequences. And I think one of them is involving Ilsa Faust, and the other is that dirt bike base jump that we get later on in the movie. Those sequences are wholly effective on their own. And so when you make the choice in the editing room to intercut between two different scenes, it removes the fear for the characters out of the equation. And that was the complaint that I kept coming back to about this movie. And again, it just left it kind of feeling a little bit lackluster in the end. The stunts are incredible, the action is incredible, and really, this was my only gripe that I had with this film. I still prefer Mission Impossible Fallout and Ghost Protocol to Dead Reckoning Part 1. But again, it's not a completed story. There's a lot left hanging at the end of this movie to set up Part 2. And they were currently in production on Dead Reckoning Part 2, but the SAG strike has now put that on pause. But let me know what you all think of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 down in the comments below. We would love to hear your thoughts on it and whether or not you had a good time at the theaters, because we certainly did.